So, hello friends, and welcome to the Bought the T-Shirt podcast, in which I'm going to be asking my guests to put a T-shirt on that has some significance for them. And I can see that my guest today has certainly done that. So, Graeme, Bint, welcome to the podcast. Thank you ever so much for joining me, Graeme. I'll just explain how we met.
Yeah,
and then I'll ask you to tell our listeners and our viewers just a bit about yourself. So, Graeme and I are both former forces, British forces. We are members of a certain Facebook page that's for basically to support veterans. I won't say anything more about that. And I saw Graeme's reply to a member on there, and I found it quite, I have to be honest, I found it quite pertinent, but I also found it quite hilarious. And it was something along the lines of this former female veteran was posting about, you know, how brilliant the veterans are and how poor civilians are, and how they should recognize that we're all heroes. And I know that, Graeme, like myself, you have you take it, we take more of a sort of realistic view, let's say. I think it's fair to say Graeme and I have been around the block a few times, shared a few experiences, actually. And so Graeme kind of, in a nutshell, put it back to her. Is that what the British and American forces are doing, rampaging around the globe? Poking their nose into other countries' affairs, particularly where there seems to be oil. Is that the heroic nature of our job? So that's how we met. I'm going to shut up there and just hand over to you, Graeme, if you can tell us a bit about yourself and your connection to the military, of course.
Yeah, sure, Chris. Thanks, mate. And that was quite amusing how we met there. I think the phrase, or one of the phrases was used, was one that peeves me a little bit, is about how people can sleep safely at night while other men fight for your freedom. And I just query what freedom we're fighting for. Sorry to go off. I joined the RAF regiment when I was 17 and a half. I'd gone through the usual indoctrination. My parents were in the military. My father was in the military. Gone to air cadets. And I joined up with a guy called Fergus, a good friend of mine called Fergus. And remember that name because he'll probably come into the conversation later. And he joined the para-reg. But it was just after the Falklands in 1983. And the para-reg was quite a long waiting list. So I think the Marines was as well. And so I just wanted to be airborne of one sort or another. So I joined the RAF regiment and tried to become the parachute squadron of the RAF regiment. Took me a little bit of time to get there, but I got there in the end and got my wings. And in that time, served in Northern Ireland. Went to the first Gulf War. What was that? Granby. Went to Cyprus. Learned to water ski and eat kebabs. Where did I go? Went across to Jordan or somewhere. But
can I just interrupt you there?
Yeah.
Because as well as talking about the serious stuff, I think it's important for our listeners to hear a bit of banter. Well, when you water skied, did you fall over? What I mean by that is, my dad told me a story when he was a teenager. He had a big fear of snakes, right? A kind of phobia, you could say. And when he went water skiing with all his sort of teenage friends one day, and obviously there's a few girls there, so it was a bit of a showing off thing, right?
Yeah.
He saw a fisherman catch an eel, and he was bashing this eel on the rocks, right, to put this eel out of his misery. And of course, my dad's got a phobia about, long, slivery things. So they were on a pontoon. He put the water skis on, and the guy's like, right, now you have to get in the water, and the boat's gonna,
Yeah.
the boat's gonna pull you up. So my dad said, "Isn't there like a, like another way of doing it?" So the guy's like, what do you mean another way? He's like, "Well, where I don't have to get wet." The guy said, "Well," he said,
if you're really good,
you can go off the pontoon, right?" And my dad said, "Yep, that'll do me, right?" So he's holding on. This boat powers up, and of course, my dad, he's a bit like me. We've got a real good sense of balance in our family. I don't know why. We probably lack in many other areas, but this boat shot off, and my dad kind of just lurched off this pontoon, went all the way around the lake, and when he came back in, he just came alongside the pontoon and just stepped onto it.
No way.
So fast forward, 25, maybe 25 years, I was in Barbados. I was on the Marines detachment on there for a year. And on the beach, I think it was called Paradise Beach, they were doing water skiing. And I'm a bucket list guy. It's like if I see something that I've ever thought of in my life, I'm just going to, whether it's, bungee, whatever, I've got to do it, right? So I got on the shoreline, held on to the whatever you call that thing you hold on to, the leash. And off the boat went. I'm like, right, I'm not falling over. My dad didn't fall over. I'm not falling over. And I went all around the bay. And then as the boat came back in, I just held on with one arm, started veering off, like getting off a ski lift, right?
Yeah.
And went and stepped onto the beach. So, yeah, anyway, sorry, I digress.
No, it's quite impressive. I actually managed to break my nose. I don't know how you do that, but I did. And of course, the usual enemas that you get when you don't wear wetsuits. But you know what it's like when squaddies get hold of a boat and a jet ski. You don't really take things too seriously, and you tend to find it fun to cut over the wake of other boats. So I went 5 foot in the air, down into the water, came back up, and the ski smacked me straight in the nose, broke my nose. But the reason I was saying that really was, I think it's it's a kind way of saying that I was a Cold War warrior, Chris. And I love that expression. I joined up in '83, and I left 8 years later after Gulf War, which would be '91, I guess. And so I call myself a Cold War warrior. I did a tour of Northern Ireland, and that wasn't too hard with the RAF regiment. And out of the three the 3 flights in our squadron that we have when we went to Cyprus, only one squadron went further into Baghdad. So we just sat back and ate kebabs and got drunk in Cyprus. and they gave me a medal for it, which I found very, very funny indeed.
They should have given me one, Graeme, really, because as I said, when I was on HMS Invincible, which for people listening was a British aircraft carrier, we were the first ship to set sail for was it the first Iraq conflict, wasn't it, in about 91, 92?
91, yeah, Granby.
So we're the first ship to set sail. I said goodbye to all my family, did all the, the hug, might not see you again sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
And that was it. We went off to war.
By the time you got there, it would have been over, wouldn't it?
Well, the thing was, we were going to be obviously air cut. An aircraft carrier provides air cover, so it's quite a crucial role. And as we started moving away from the dock in Portsmouth, and there's 12 Marines all sat in our mess deck, this is it, boys. This is what we train for. We're off. The captain came over the tannoy, and he said words to the effect of, "Ladies and gentlemen," we had women on board. We were the first ship to have women on board. We're no longer going to war. They're going to send the new Atlantic, the first Atlantic conveyor was sunk in the Falklands, right? They're sending the new Atlantic conveyor instead of us. And all around the ship, you heard all these matlows just cheering because they could go back to their wives and girlfriends.
And all
in
the
Marines mess. Yeah, there was just 12 guys looking at the floor like that. just again.
But we'll swim there. We'll swim there. Honestly, we'll get there somehow.
So where's
Give us
my
a
medal?
Zodiac. We'll make our own way.
Where's my medal?
Well, if you're American, you probably would have got one.
I've only got one medal, and it's in my son's bedroom. I gave it to him to play with as a toy, and kind of tells you sort of how seriously I take trinkets, right?
Exactly. Which we'll I'm sure we'll come back to.
Yeah.
Excuse me. While I was there, the funny thing was, you know, it made me question what we were doing and why we were going there to this American war. And I read a book while I was there called Heroes by John Pilger. And John Pilger is a very renowned, honest journalist, investigative Australian journalist. And I would implore anyone to read his books or watch his YouTubes or whatever. And it woke me up to history and the fact that all the history that I've ever heard and been taught wasn't actually quite right. And he spoke with a certain, you know, his writing had a certain veracity and honesty, and it could be checked. So, well, you know, the ironic thing is I was sent to war, and I read a book there that made me, as soon as I came back, I PVR'd or paid my release, because I saw the writing on the wall, Chris. I just went, we're just going to get sent from pillar to post to American wars here, and I don't agree with that, and that's not what I joined up for. And so I bought myself out and joined Civvy Street, and funnily enough, straight after that, or very shortly after that, found myself in a war zone. And that's the irony of going to that war.
We could say that was your awakening then, really.
I think that was the start of it. And if I have to pinpoint a time, it was reading that book. And I don't know how that book came to me, but that started to alert me to the fact that, as you're fully aware, history is written by the victors. But
can I just say on that point, people think that's a cliche, right? Or just a glib. They don't. It would be so great if people could truly understand that is so true.
That's correct.
And we're not just talking about, you know, I don't know, let's say Vietnam, for example, where the American, you know, I've met ex-Marines in Florida, you know, a biker gang celebrating victory in Vietnam, right? You know, this is like history written by the winners. And for our younger listeners, the Americans basically got their fucking ass kicked in Vietnam, and quite right, you know, quite rightly so.
And left with their tail between their legs.
Yeah, as the atrocity that they, you know, the I don't want to say politicians, because the older you get, the more you realize politicians they're not politicians, they're just puppets for the ruling elite. Yeah. But you know, they sent these young boys over there to get slaughtered in their, you know, thousands upon thousands, and decimate the local population, and
Laos and Cambodia
and neighboring nations, and of course the way that they cleverly extracted themselves was it was a peace process, you know, it was a mutual kind of, you know, we've done our, and it wasn't, all it was a money making exercise for the huge corporations and the banks that had planned this war, were waiting for the right moment. They used the Gulf of Tonkin incident to trigger, you know, as a trigger with the enemy.
Yeah, which has been disproved, right? Completely disproved.
Oh, of course.
As we know.
But my point is, when you look into the Second World War, which we all herald as, oh, Hitler was a madman, and, you know, it's like you just see the same setup, you know.
You do it. It almost repeats itself.
I'm not going to profess I'm a mad history guy. I'm not even going to profess I know an awful lot about the world, but I certainly know a bit more than the majority.
Yeah.
And also I have something called intellect and the kind of sixth sense you develop.
Yeah. Or critical thinking.
Yeah, critical thinking, but also a sense when you sense there's agendas in play in life that you don't see until you're smart enough to see them, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just intelligence that allows you to see it, because I see people on the TV that I really respect.
Yeah.
And then they start talking about things like verbatim, like that, or you know, telling narratives verbatim that anyone with half an iota of common sense can question, right?
The worst one recently was Morgan Freeman. When he came out and made that speech about America or whatever it was, and that was dreadful because everyone loves Morgan Freeman as an actor.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'll hear someone that I really, really respect, and then they'll come out with some official narrative on 9/11, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh,
go away.
Or the other one is, you know, well, we put a man on the moon, and it's like, here's the thing I say to everyone, right? You have to develop the ability, at the very least, to withhold judgment on something that you clearly don't know an awful lot about, other than what you've seen on the television, right?
Yeah.
For example, and I don't want to go down this moon landing conspiracy route, but because we're here to talk about, you know, probably more fun and, well, certainly other things. But I always say to people, you know, at least have the respect for yourself to say, do you know what? I don't actually know. You know, I now you mention it, I've only seen what I've been told on the TV. We've got this NASA here that have this huge billions of dollars budget every year. So they're a massive player that stands to keep this, you know, this facade, let's say, up. And do you know what? I'm going to hold my judgment and I'm going to wait for sort of. But no, what you have is people going, well, no, I'm not having that. And it's the same. It's the same with this. When I talk about this kind of esoteric sense, people have been playing this game since the time before the pyramids, right? Controlling the population, controlling the, you know, the poor or the impoverished. Not even necessarily that, but George Orwell called them in 1984 the proles, the proletariat, right? The people basically have been controlled by this elite since the days of old, and they've had thousands of years to perfect these mind control techniques. And they do it so well, and it's not somebody going, look at my hand, look at bang, you're gonna believe you know, it's not about that. It's that it's so subtle that the average Joe or Joanna in the street is not gonna know. How many people tell you how wonderful the BBC is, right? Oh my God, wake up.
Well, I had someone say the same thing to me on a Facebook rant. Literally the words were, don't you watch the ABC news, as if that was clarification, as you say. So it's crazy. But as you said about old times of old, was it Voltaire that said, if those that can make us believe absurdities can make us commit atrocities, and that's going back some time.
And they're so clever. I mean, just for example, take the BBC. They spend a fortune of our budget, right? We have to pay for that.
Yeah, that's right.
They spend a fortune of their budget on nature programs, and they are exceptionally brilliant, right? They quite cleverly kind of don't really put a bit of balance when it comes to saying, you know, you see this beautiful lion in a, you know, roaming the plain in Africa. Well, your actions today are going to kill that lion next week. You know, they're not so. I know the old, what's his name, David Attenborough he started to get a bit down, but that's because they have to. Eventually,
well, you wonder who's paying them as well.
Yeah, they have to throw you a bone.
Yeah.
So you don't.
Something interesting about that, Chris, about your documentaries, your wildlife documentaries about psyops or propaganda. I was a tour guide in Africa for a while, driving the trucks and going through game parks, and so I've watched an awful lot of documentaries, animal documentaries. I've studied animal life, and funnily enough, we're not too dissimilar. But the interesting thing is if you're watching a show about lions, and the lions are getting very emaciated because there's no grass, there's no food, there's no hunt, and you follow and you know their names, and one of these lions is going to die. If they make a kill of a zebra, you cheer for the lion, right? Hooray, the lion! Thank God, Fred the lion is alive. He's going to live for longer. However, if you're watching a documentary about zebras, it's completely different.
Yeah.
Right.
The thing I was saying is that the reason they do these wonderful documentaries and you can't fault them is that they're giving you with this hand, but it's like the magician. You're not seeing what they're doing to your mind through the other manipulation channels, namely the news. With this, it's like, look at my hand, look at my hand, look at my hand, you know?
Yeah. And in the meantime, someone's just won an election. Yeah.
Now, going back to our original point, and that is history is a lie.
Yeah.
It's not even just history that is a lie. Your diet, your nutrition is a lie. Your medicine is a lie.
Our heroes are lies.
Your heroes are a lie. Your education system is a lie. None of it is done for the common good or the benefit of you and me and our listeners, right? It's all just a very cleverly sculpted scam that, as I said, they've been doing for thousands of years. And what am I bothered? No, because I'm kind of enlightened, so I'm not going to let it affect my happiness and my one chance on this planet. But why am I mentioning it? I mention it because my parents' generation never told me this shit.
Well, they were oblivious to it. They were
utterly brainwashed, right? Yeah. And for young people listening now, you have the chance to achieve true happiness like I have in my life, but you've got the chance to do it at 20 years old. If that is what you so wish. Okay, we need a bit of life experience to be able to make sense, but certainly by 30, you don't have to wait till you're 50 like me, or like I'm going to say, like probably the vast majority of the community, they never find that happiness.
No.
They might be oblivious to it, which is kind of okay, but if you get one life, do you want to live it being oblivious to what is actually going on and what this wonderful universe is providing you with, which is this energy that make, you know, sometimes driving along in the car this morning and it's just, I'm so happy, Graeme, you know?
Yeah.
So happy. And then the second you have to go to social media, and I only use social media because I've been an author for 10 years. It's the way of interacting with my public. Don't get me wrong. I meet wonderful people like yourself. I've got people on my Facebook have supported me for 10 years. I've got a Patreon account where people pay £2 a month to like be on my team and help me make decisions, and they get all kind of stuff in return, I should say. But
it's a double-edged sword.
But when you go down through that comment section, you see how bitter people are.
There's there's such an anger, isn't there?
There's such an anger, and there's such a sense of resentment.
Yeah.
And also this self-entitlement that I've got a keyboard. I'm going to just tell you what I think. And this is in no way a criticism. It's just saying to people, guys, there is so much more to life than that, you know? There's so much more to life. And for the younger generation, you have been screwed over with all this crap, you know? Every generation faces a fresh set of challenges. They face the same manipulation that hasn't ever changed, but new set of challenges. And this is not you know, a criticism of young people. Not at all in any way. You are, if you're a young person, you are wonderful, right? It's the criticism of what our generation and ones before have been oblivious to. So we've let this go ahead. We've let people think that spending all day typing into a phone, literally walking in front of cars because they've lost the sense of safety now, because everything's become so protected. You know, now when I drive and someone's coming up to the curb, I have to stop. Because I know that it's a person who's lost the sense of the ability to protect themselves, because they've been so mollycoddled wrapped in cotton wool by health and safety. And they're so preoccupied with this illusionary world in their hand, right? And I just hope that through these kind of honest conversations that we're having, that maybe they're going to upset some people, and that's okay, because, you know, you can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs, right?
That's right. You're spot on what you say. What you've got to be careful of is how you tell people things. And there's a funny thing in psychology that I've noticed as well, that if people find stuff out for themselves, it will sink in. But if you just tell people stuff, they don't want to listen. And everybody wants to be right in this world. And you run the gauntlet of causing a thing called the Backfire Effect, which it's actually the equivalent of physical pain to be wrong. So people will protect that, and they'll protect their identity. So you have to be very careful about how you go about. You used a good word, enlightened. So it's very careful how you go about enlightening people, because people don't want to be told, but they do want to learn themselves. So if we go back to the history thing,
can I just say, Graeme? Can I just say one thing there?
Yeah.
Is I do things through my actions, right? I'm not trying to sound like me or anything. It's just, I remember the days where I used to reply on a social media message. We're talking about 6 years ago now, when I was actually that naive. I thought maybe I can, you know, affect, not, I don't want to change people's, but I want to enlighten them. Some of the things that they're saying are just holding society in this damage, right? In this damaged framework, right? But now, I don't do any of that. I just live my life. And then when people come to me and they're interested, they want to know, like, how can you run 1,000 miles non-stop with no training? And I tell them how I came to be that person, right? How did you travel, like, the whole, you know, I've lived, worked and traveled now in 80 countries across all 7 continents. I'm sure many of my listeners are sick of me saying that, but the point is, it's there for everybody, right? You need the mindset. And so I think through my actions, it means that now when I talk, people are probably more receptive, whereas before, when they just think you're a keyboard warrior, and they can't put a personality to the avatar on Facebook or whatever, or a profile picture.
It's almost like you've got to get yourself some kudos first, and before you have a platform to have people listen.
Yeah, and also,
sadly,
it's just that enlightenment. It's like the Buddhist kind of thing that you're. And I'm not trying to contradict you at all. I'm just saying that it's that thing where by your actions you change the world.
Yeah.
You know, by your, like, so if you're recycling,
get your own house in order.
Yeah, if you're you know, keeping yourself in good order, you're acting enlightened, which is above the waist stuff. Anything below the waist is all ego, right? So it means you're acting. Probably sounds a bit confusing the way I've just said it, but this relates to Eastern philosophy, where you have the chakras in the body, but what I just say to people, the easy way to think of it, you've got a line across your middle. If you behave in your upper body and your mind, you're behaving out of sincerity, kindness. You're in line with the universe. Everything, happiness is going to come to you.
Yeah.
When you're below the body, which is your greed, lying, narcissism, ego, money, not practicing forgiveness, lack of empathy, all those things are going to keep you mired down in unhappiness, right? And by acting in the upper body, you become this person that then naturally has an attractive effect on other people, because they think, dude, how come you're always happy? You know, this is kind of a simple analogy, but sorry, back to you, Graeme.
No, it's not. What you're saying is, if I'm hearing it right, so if you operate and act from yourself instead of your ego, you will attract the right people, and that's correct. But to operate from yourself and not your ego, you also have to give up caring what other people think about you, because what other people think about you is none of your business.
Yes, very much so.
And I had this conversation today with somebody about okay, so it's very hard to talk to soldiers, you know, hairy ass Marines and paratroopers who may be struggling with whether it's post-traumatic stress or depression. It's very hard to talk to them about things like meditation because there's a perception of this Eastern philosophy, whatever you want to call it, whether you want to call it chakras or yoga or meditation. And that has
hippie shit.
Hippie shit. It has that connotation, and you're not going to tell some hairy ass para who's just come out of a war zone. But the interesting thing is we've had this, you know, this Eastern philosophy, and we've had this Western medicine and philosophy, and with the onset of neuroscience now, we're discovering things about us. I mean, we just discovered a new organ in our bodies, which is incredible. But we're discovering things about ourselves and our brain through MOAI scans or whatever they're called, such as, you know, the heart contains memory and has neural cells, and the gut has neural cells, and we've got this gut brain, heart brain. The heart sends more signals to the brain than it receives via the vagus nerve, and what I'm seeing is that the Eastern philosophy had some sort of name for it, like chakra or purple rising or something that we weren't too keen with, but now neuroscience is seeing the same thing, and the two are converging in the middle. Now, either side of Western medicine and Eastern philosophy, there's some BS, but generally I see a convergence now with neuroscience that it's the same thing with different names.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah,
it's like the Eye of Horus, isn't it? The Egyptian symbol,
the pineal.
It's a diagram, or it's a diagram of the pineal gland in the brain, which is also known as the third eye.
Oh, yeah.
But it's
hippie language.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Science are now bringing in the limbic system into our brains, right? And
so we're now posed with the new knowledge that, my God, these civilizations, and they knew all this before us, right? Yeah. Then you look in the Bible and you see analogies or we see expressions such as the land of milk and honey, and then you realize that that is a metaphor, if that's the right word, for the serotonin and the dopamine releases in the brain. Then you're like, oh my God, really work. How did they know this? You know?
Yeah.
It's fascinating. But yeah, it's I call all of this enlightenment. You talked about you being in a war zone to see, let's just call it the bullshit of war, you know, or the lie of war. For me, I kind of had my, what I would call enlightenment, my epiphany, right?
Yeah.
And people can read about this in my second memoir, 40 Nights. But I literally kind of woke up off the floor one day, just had my boxer shorts on, and I won't go into too much detail for this conversation, but I would have looked myself in the mirror, but I'd probably smashed that mirror along with everything else in the house, right? But I wasn't the person looking back at me that I used to know, right? And in that moment, you know, I'd lost everything through addiction.
Yeah.
And I was still chasing the drugs, thinking that this is going to make my life happy, right?
Yeah.
And in that moment, I woke up to the fact, hang on, dude, this ain't working no more. In fact, be honest with yourself, because these drugs, they haven't worked for quite a long time for you now, and you're still so let's have a bit of a revisal of our plan, right? You know, that was it. I never promised to be an angel. I never wanted to go to meetings. No. I've never been to see a doctor, other than like when I had to, because I was chronically mentally unwell, right? But I've done everything in my life. I've done myself, right? I haven't even done it with family and friends, because none of them have been where I've been. Although I did have you know, I've had the support of a friend, I should say, in case he's listening, and also my family in kind of various times in my life. But anyway, that was what I call my moment of enlightenment. I rose up off that floor and I suddenly saw people, I'm going to say, for who they really were. And that is very often kind of afraid animals.
Yeah.
You know, when you're thinking, why don't they like me? Why don't they support me? Everyone's just left me. It's like, no, they're afraid. People are quite cowardly when they're not led, you know, by leaders, right? And
yeah,
so that was that moment. But my actual global awakening, as you call it, you know, the red pill, the green pill kind of scenario, or red pill, blue pill. I always get it wrong. That was I was in university. I went into a lecture and I was studying youth work. And the lecturer just like turned around to there was a few of us sat around a table, and he said, do you know that, like, there's people saying that plane that hit the Pentagon, it wasn't a plane, it was it's some sort of missile, right? Well, I'm not even going to say I was fascinated, but it certainly kind of sunk in there a bit that, really? So anyway, this was the very early days of the internet. And of course, to be at university, I have my first computer at home. So I went home and I put the internet on, the old dial-up connection, used to make that horrible screeching noise. Youngsters are going, these old cunts, what are they going on about, right? But so I got the internet up and I did a search on those terms, and lo and behold, there's pages and pages and pages of quite plausible, I'm not going to say evidence, because that's always subjective, but
no, really, you should say lack of evidence, because a lot of evidence was hidden.
Yeah, there was just basically a lot of supporting information to support this theory. And that just sent me then, literally, I'm enlightened, but I'm going down the rabbit hole. So I don't know if you, I was kind of light in the dark, I suppose you could say.
Well, once you go down the rabbit hole.
Well, I'm so glad I did, you know.
Yeah.
Because the one thing, again, for people listening, when you hear people go, oh, I used to get into all that shit, but it's too depressing. And it's like, yeah, but when you're enlightened and you learn then that this doesn't get you down, you know, you've got one chance at this life, and you've got to keep your mood and your happiness and your performance up. Just because there's wankers in this world, greedy, narcissistic, horrible people psychopath, I'm gonna probably say sociopathic, you know. These people have never known true love. They don't have the empathy gene in them.
Have empathy.
So they just think greed. This is, you know, go on.
So just on roughly the first bit you said about, you know, pulling yourself out of addiction. I'm very glad you did, because many people don't, Chris, as I'm sure you're aware. So there's something in you that's pulled that survival. And as an ex-paramedic, I've Narcaned a lot of dead people back to life, and it's not pleasant, and it's wholly sad, you know. And I never judge those people generally, because
people listening, Narcan is the injection when you've had a heroin overdose, isn't it?
So it reverses the opioid receptors and cancels out. And the funny thing is, to inject, excuse the pun, inject some humor into it, is the first that they don't realize they're dead, or they're blue, or they're not breathing. So you bring them around, the first thing they do is get pissed off at you because you've just ruined their 10-pound hit of heroin, right?
Yeah.
So I used to quite often, I would tie their bootlaces together before I Narcaned them. And one guy, he jumped straight up, got the shits with me, went to kick me. His first leg came and his back leg followed him, and he fell flat on his ass. And I just walked away and waited for the police to come. But I never judge those people, Chris, because generally, and there's a lovely book called Good Cop, Bad War. I can't remember the guy's name, but all those people have generally come through trauma of one shape or another. And that's the thingy drug is trauma.
Addiction is a manifestation, for the most part, of unresolved childhood trauma.
Trauma is the gateway drug. That's what I was trying to say. Yeah.
So when you hear people saying drugs cause addiction, it's like they have no idea. They're just saying what they've seen on the news and read in, you know, or read in their newspapers. Drugs cannot cause addiction.
Well, hang on. Well, let's prove that. If you've been in for an operation, I'm sure you've got a few broken bits and pieces on you. So you've been in hospital. You've had a few operations. What did they give you? Morphine as a painkiller?
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So let's say, I mean, my dad spent a fair amount of time in hospital, probably a few months on a morphine. You know, they have those things. You just press the button now, right?
Yeah. That's.
When he came out of hospital, he wasn't addicted to morphine. No.
Whereas for me, when I go into hospital, and I've had surgery a couple of years ago, it is an issue. Because I still have that childhood trauma is a very difficult thing to clear. Okay, the only time I've ever really got close to, I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't. It's not it's not like it affects. Well, I guess it does affect my daily life. It's a hard thing to quantify, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But when I go in hospital and they give me that stuff, then I have to get back on what I call it, getting back on the horse.
Yeah.
Because immediately that high that you get from the opiate, even though it's effectively killing pain, that is then soothing my underlying trauma.
Absolutely. Trauma and anger, right? You're escaping reality and you're becoming.
I realized that straight away, and I will then have this conversation with my partner and say, right, you know, I realize now, like, my pain is going, but I'm still on this, what is essentially well, it is a drug, right?
They're all drugs, mate.
And then, but I'm so fortunate in my life to have relapsed so many times, which is fine. You know, I mean, I'm quite lucky, Graeme, that most of my nonsense went on before I was a father.
Yeah.
I call it nonsense. It's not right. All of my learning went on before I became a father. Right? Yeah. And that's what lapses and relapses are. It's a learning curve. Okay. This is why I have quite a lot to say about groups like AA and NA, because they cut that learning out of people's lives. Now, sometimes that can be good because the person's going to die from heroin. You know, they're going to overdose shortly, right? Or their liver's going to pack up because they're drinking. So I say that, you know, sometimes as a stopgap measure.
Perhaps, yeah.
You know, these groups are great, but when you stop people learning, you're essentially condemning them to a life in the.
You're replacing it with something else.
Yeah, you replace it with something else, and you stop.
And sometimes that's religion, sadly.
Yeah, and all these things. And my only point.
That's going to be a good segue into something about my post-traumatic stress and how I treat post-traumatic stress with trauma. That's going to be a good segue. But I just want to reverse it a little bit into something you said. The second thing, you're talking about the missile into the Pentagon or whatever. And this is where we can revert back. And as I said, you have to be very careful about how you inform people of things. And if you were to jump in straight in with a conspiracy theory, which is a phrase coined by the CIA, of course, and that's how to ruin anyone's argument, just label it a conspiracy theory. But if you say one, then apparently you believe in all of them. So if you believe in the Pentagon was hit by a missile, you also believe the world was flat, and it's just crazy. So this is why I say you have to be very careful about how you introduce people.
There's a video in my playlist. I've explained to people what the flat earth theory is all about, who came up with it and why they did. And it's exactly what you just said. It's so these psychopathic
can label one thing with another.
Yeah, they can.
And there's the irony, right? People buy into that shit.
They can perpetrate any atrocity on the world now. Do you know why? Because no one will question it. Because the second they do, they get called conspiracy. You know,
tin hat wearer.
You're a flat earther.
And the irony is they don't realise that those groups on Facebook are actually made by psyops. They're not real people. It's not a real group, right? It's there to make you angry. Yeah. But let me go back, because we were talking about history. Now, the best way that I found of introducing people to the nuances of history is I implore everybody to watch Oliver Stone's Untold History of the United States. And that, I mean, obviously Oliver Stone, I think he was a Marine, but he obviously served. He's a phenomenal film writer, maker, and a very intelligent man with lived experience. And that documentary, and I hope we can put the links up to that, I think it's 270 minutes or maybe even longer. It explains from early history through Vietnam to Gulf War to present day to Japan, Nagasaki. And it explains, with a historian, very, very revered historian, just how the propaganda through people like Edward Bernays was twisted and contorted, and the history was told by the victors, and basically to call it a bunch of lies is a little bit strong, but just how it was contorted slightly to favor us, really. And everything that he says in there, as I've done, you can research.
Can I just say one thing about Oliver Stone?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, he did Platoon, right?
Yeah.
Oh, what a brilliant Vietnam, portrayal of true. The bit where is it Kevin Bacon's character says, I love war. You know, I love being in Vietnam. You get to fuck shit up and no one fucks with you. You know,
Yeah.
That if anyone's interested, Sebastian Junger, he does that kind of. He's researched that area. Why do young men love war, even though you know, a civilian might think it's atrocious? Why do young men not just love war, but they want to go back to the war?
Yeah,
when they get into civilians. That's another topic, but
yeah, I have a theory on that, and that's going to be a particular chapter of my book as well.
But what I want to say, didn't Oliver Stone do JFK, or am I getting my producers?
I'm not sure. I wouldn't like to say, just in case I got it wrong.
It's only that I'm just going to Google it. I'm sure. Just bear with me, everyone. I'm just JFK, Oliver Stone. Yeah, this is where a political thriller film directed by Oliver Stone.
There you go, good man.
So this is where I get disappointed, because you kind of get this hero character like Oliver Stone. He's an ex-Marine. He served in Vietnam. So, you know, he's got the credentials there, right? He makes a film like Platoon. And then he goes and makes a CIA a misleading CIA film like JFK, right? Now people are wondering what I'm talking about. There's a really good documentary called Everything's a Rich Man's Trick, and I always suggest people like watch it, and it will talk you through beginning to end what the JFK assassination was all about, who perpetrated it, why they did it, who were the gunmen, of which there were 12, believe it or not, right? Yeah. Who was the actual guy that fired the final shot? How and when you know all this, you can then look at footage like the Supergreens footage and other stuff, photographs taken on the day, and you can see these operatives, and they're a mix of mafia, CIA, and politicians, right? And you can actually see them on the street with the walkie-talkie. You can see the guy, he's been put there. He's got to put his umbrella up if they've missed the president. So he's standing just to see, have they hit the president? No, that round's missed, that round. Yeah. There was so many shots fired. So many, they say 3 bullets, right? No, there was so many more. And the guy's on the pavement with his umbrella. And when the cavalcade, you know, the cars drew near, the president is still alive, and so he puts this umbrella up, and that is the sign for the guy down the storm drain, right? America, they've got these huge storm, you know, what we call a drain, they call it storm drains, right? The guy's in the storm drain, the final sniper, and that's why he shot JFK from the front. Gets even more bizarre when they tell you about swapping the president's body with a chap called J.D. Tippit, who they blamed Lee Harvey Oswald for shooting dead outside of the movie theater, right? And it was like, no, Lee Harvey Oswald didn't have anything to do with it. They needed a body double for the president. Yeah. And this police officer called J.D. Tippit, his nickname was JFK because he was a spitting image of the president, right? And they needed a fresh cadaver, a body, to shoot in the right place, like the back of the head, to make it look like the Lee Harvey Oswald character did it, right? Yeah, yeah. Anyway, we're kind of digressing, but my point was...
I can't comment on Oliver Stone's film. I haven't seen JFK, and I don't watch a lot of Hollywood. In regard to JFK and that, I tend not to make any judgment. I watched the film you saw, and again, because really, you've got to be careful how you get across to people because of the you'll get labelled with everything. But there is most certainly too much ridiculous lack of evidence in that whole case to not question it. The fact that, you know, from memory, I do recall that nobody was allowed in the hospital. They secured that. No one was allowed in, including his wife. And so there was obviously a lot of weird shit happening. That's enough of a smokescreen just for me to say, yeah, I don't know, but I don't think it's like, exactly. I don't think it's like they tell us it like, and when, so that juxtaposed to the fact that we learn everything's a bloody lie anyway, we start following the money, and there was a Hollywood film that I watched. I think it's called The Shooter, and I think is it Mark Wahlberg, I believe. And when you watch that film, I don't know if it was based upon JFK, but when you watch that film, you suddenly realize how easy these things are for the CIA or the FBI or Mossad or whoever else is out there. You can see in this Hollywood film, it's that easy to do.
Yeah. You've only got to control a certain percentage of the public, and there must be an algorithm, right? Before, it doesn't matter who else can see the truth.
Well, it's called the bandwagon fallacy. You referred to it earlier, and there's the thing's called logical fallacies. And this is, I always try to, there's no point arguing or debating anybody unless people know how the brain works, how our biases work, how cognitive dissonance works. And there's these things called logical fallacies that people employ to assist their own motivated reasoning. And one of them is, one of those logical fallacies is what you speak of, and it's called the bandwagon fallacy, which means if enough people believe in something, I'll believe in it.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter who sees the truth. There's too many people on the bandwagon. They're just going to ride over. Yeah. And these sociopaths, they understand this because
very, very much they understand it.
You know, they've been doing it for, like I say, thousands of years, and but it's fascinating when you see how they do it. It you know, again, it's all part of enlightenment. I'm kind of I think it's impossible to read 1984 and then not see that there's an agenda in the world.
Well, the best baseball cap I see is what is it? 1984 was not an instruction manual or something. Yeah. And Brave New World as well, or Aldous Huxley, or what, as I call it, a Brave New 1984. And I think the closest we're coming to a new George Orwell is Ben Elton, and he writes amazing books. And his latest one called Blind Faith is very hard to read without seeing that that's a prediction of the future. That's quite scary, actually. And he writes very good conspiracy books as well.
So for people listening, if you haven't read 1984, you absolutely must.
Is it still taught in schools?
Oh, I don't think it was ever a main text. Although there are abridged versions, so maybe it was. But for people listening, it's like if you really want to know what is taking place in society now, why people hate each other, and you know, why the language is changing. If you notice, there's so many new words in our language, but they're all negative. You know?
They're all there for control.
Yeah, they're all there. What is it, like influencer? And you know, is a newspeak word. It's someone that's there to
woke.
Yeah, all these. I mean, woke's quite a good one, I'd say, a good newspeak word. But
no, I'll disagree with you there, because I think woke's used in the wrong way, as opposed to what I think what you're trying to say is when someone becomes awake or enlightened, whereas woke is slightly different.
What does woke mean then?
Well, I think woke is more of a lesser sort of left wing. I hate to use the phrase, but left hard saying, where they think they woke to things like climate, and so where they're not quite. They're only one layer of the onion.
Yeah. They
think they've got the whole picture, and there's the irony, and everything's bloody binary with them as well.
But in 1984, how clever, he said that they have this TV screen in the house, and it's a two-way screen, so it's filming you all the time, but also you're getting brainwashed by who he calls Big Brother, right?
Yeah.
Well, that is what an analogy for a mobile phone.
Where we headed. I mean,
it's just
exactly. Book. Yeah.
It's exactly.
Book, like, what do we have? We have Snapchat, and we have Facebook and Messenger. In Ben Elton's book, it's just permanent screen in your house, and your whole group of people. You're just 24/7. Wow. And I at first I sort of, I read it as fiction, but now I read it as almost reality. And when you start thinking about Facebook Live, and it seems to be coming that way. And as you said, it's just going back. 1984 predicted it.
Well, exactly. And there's also this whole agenda to soften men up. I'm not talking about making men more caring or better individuals. I'm talking about stealing their identity by suggesting that you can have a choice in whether you're a man, you're male or female. And again, I know this is a very difficult subject for a lot of people, and I don't mean any offense whatsoever. But what I would suggest is this infighting now that's developed over issues which essentially aren't really issues if you approach them with just a scientific, with a clinical scientific approach, right? But they're getting blown out of all proportions because it plays into this agenda of setting the people up to hate each other.
Yeah.
And of course, while the people are all hating each other, they're not
with murder.
Yeah, they're not focused.
That's the irony of it all, right? Let's all argue the toss about the small points. Well, we missed the big points.
Yeah.
Well, they invade 7 countries in the next 5 years.
Yeah, but it makes you wonder if there's something. It really does make you wonder how it all. I don't even know if I want to say how it all works. I mean, I just do think there's an agenda.
Sure.
If I've heard mentioned the Council of 5,000, I think it's called. It's this esoteric. I wouldn't call it it's not a cult as such. It's this esoteric organization, allegedly, right? Where it's kind of dead man's shoes. So it's 5,000 people who are indoctrinated into this highly secretive group to basically control the world, right? Now, for anyone listening, of course, I don't know whether that's true or not. That's not my point. What my point is, when you see what's going on, you're like, yeah, that would make sense. The 5,000 greedy, narcissistic, sociopathic, inbred morons who actually meet in private to create the absolute nonsense that we're seeing now in the world. Yeah, that would make that kind of makes sense, But then again, I saw a guy on an American podcast quite recently, and he was suggesting that 80%, right? Not 50, not 30, not 20, 80% of people in positions of power in the United States are belong to an esoteric agenda, So we're talking I'm not talking about like Freemasons here, you know, guys that go down to their lodge on a Friday night and they have their ceremonies and this kind of thing. We're talking like above this kind of level. And this guy reckoned it's very dark, very, very dark. And it's like this. My mind couldn't write that off. I couldn't just say, no, that's not what, you know, I because I've seen so much stuff in the world, right? And if you've got guys believing in good, and I believe that human beings are essentially good, I believe it brings out the best in us. I believe if you practice kindness and love, you move into the light and life just becomes just really great, you know. I can't imagine being depraved. Mate, you know, they talk about signing a Faustian Pact, right? So as they say, so the scenario is that's being suggested. You get to a point in life, maybe you're a top at what you do, right? But it doesn't matter if you're the top of what you do. There's thousands of other people in the world, maybe even hundreds of thousands, that are equally as good as you, and they're all vying for the top. So, for example, musicians is a prime example of this, right? How many times have you been to an open mic night and you see this amateur musician, you think, bloody hell, they should have a record contract, right? They are absolutely superb and they write their own material, right? Well, the thing is, there's hundreds of thousands of these people, right? They get to this position and there's this glass ceiling that's then imposed by, let's say, the Hollywood or the media industry, the music industry, right? And then, well, what can they do? Think about it. They can cherry pick, and the way that they can cherry pick, or the way that they can bring people through that glass ceiling, is getting them to sign up to a deal, whether that's a contract that's out in the open that everybody can have a look and read, or whether it's more subtle, like Graeme, you know, you sign here, you go, we're going to give you $1 million record deal, but you know, there'll be things you need to do for this. Are you happy about? Great. So, you know, whether it starts like that, we don't know. But when you see the desperate levels some of these celebrities are willing to go to keep this awful egotistic personality in front of the cameras, then you start to see
how easy it would be.
I believe. If people are wondering what is a Faustian Pact, well, again, I'm not the most the smartest guy in the world, but I'm led to believe Faust was a writer, and he wrote a book, or the book was about anyway. The point is, the Faustian Pact is when you sign a pact with the devil.
Yeah.
What happens is you have to keep your end up. You have to keep that bargain. If you do, and you do the things that are asked of you, and some of them can be very unpleasant, you'll have a riches story. You will have your streets will be paved with gold. But that's all it is. It's materialistic wealth, right? And you will have the adulation that say as a music, you know, again, musicians, many people who've suffered trauma, right, that want to express themselves, that need a bit of adulation, right? It's a very dangerous sort of combination. And so that is the suggestion. So this guy I said on this documentary, he was saying that 80% of the people in control of the United States, so I'm guessing it's worldwide, are all kind of signed up to one agenda of some sort or another, right?
Well, let's bring this into the real world in two examples. One is and funnily enough, every time I try to find this on a search engine, it gets harder and harder to find. so I try not to use Google. I use a search engine called DuckDuckGo, and I'd advise anybody to do it. And if you don't believe me, search for 2 different things on Google and DuckDuckGo, and you'll find different results. Anyway, to bring what you're saying back into the real world, there's Geoffrey Rush, the actor. I think he was giving a presentation to Oxford when he talked about, and I can't remember the acronym, but basically he blew the whistle on female actresses writing at the bottom of their CV an acronym that meant to the effect that we'll do whatever the producer wishes, which sort of flies in the face of the Me Too movement a little bit, and Weinberg and whatnot. So it's very close to what you're saying, but real world, because that's how those things start. Yeah. But you have to have that craving for narcissism and that craving for I'll do anything to get there. And of course, there's a much more ugly side to that, but these nexuses, they exist.
I very much believe that people like Weinstein and Savile are thrown under the bus.
Oh, of course.
You know, they are. It's this whole thing again about give the public a little bit of what they want, a little bit of anger, a little bit of revenge. You know, we'll give them Jimmy Savile, who's long since dead. So what?
Yeah, doesn't matter. Bring him out. Blame it all on him.
You know, and we'll give you Weinstein, who just.
He's
the guy is a predator, right, of the finest order, but there are far worse people than him, right? You know, the whole child abuse thing, I think, is a part of why they give you these guys,
of course,
because it keeps the spotlight off these
away from them,
even bigger sickos, right? Yeah. But when you see the way it works, I'm going to tell you now, mate, it's fucking. If it wasn't for the fact I'm not scared of anything, I'd say it's fucking frightening. What I'd say instead is it's fucking fascinating, right?
Yeah.
I'll tell you why. Dave Chappelle, right? Very, very funny man. He made a big thing about, like, he was talking about exactly what we have just been discussing, this agenda, right?
Yeah.
When they offered him £1 million to re-sign his contract as a comedian, and he went in this meeting and he said the types of people in this room, they just scared the shit out of him, right? He could tell he was signing something more than just a con, right? And he went away, you know, he talks about going to Africa and this kind of stuff. But he went off the scene for 10 years, right?
Really? Yeah, I'll look this up.
When they well, 2 things, or probably more than 2 things. But when they asked him, why did you come back, Dave? He's like, well, you know, I thought not being famous was the way to go. And I can tell you now that not being famous is pretty shit. Right. That was he's like, you know, he says it's better to be famous with £1 million in the bank than crossing the street and nobody even knows, like, who, right? So basically he's saying, I've sold out. That's what you take from that, right?
Yeah.
Now, one of the reasons he wouldn't sign that contract is they wanted him to wear women's clothes. And he said, have you not noticed all black comedians? I'm going to say Kevin Hart here, although I don't watch mainstream TV. I get all this from the internet, right?
Yeah.
But you've got these all, and if you look at them, all of them at one point or another in their career have had to wear women's clothes, right? To kind of, it's almost like humiliating themselves, right? And Dave Chappelle's like, I noticed this and I'm not fucking doing it. Why are they doing? Why are they trying to make black men look stupid, you know? Well, here's the thing. When he came back and he actually did sign this contract, he appeared on a TV late night show. So it's one of those ones like oh, give me a name, you know, like
Live or something.
Yeah, like Jay Leno, like that sort of thing.
Yeah,
It wasn't. I don't think. And anyway, do you know what he walked on wearing?
A dress.
Yes. They did it as surreptitiously as they could. They would argue it's a man's t-shirt, but it's just very long, right? No, it was a dress that came down to almost his knees, right? Now, you tell me if he was not, you know, if he hadn't been, you've got your £1 million now, Dave. Yeah. Now you're going to do what we tell you, right?
Very odd, isn't it?
It's incredibly strange. And then when you start to see some of the ways that celebrities publicly humiliate themselves, and then the suggestion is, no, it's not, this isn't their behavior. This is them being told you are going to go and behave. You're going to collect your award at the award show tonight. And I want you to stand on that stage and do this. Start gobbing off at the other contestant, you know, fall off the Madonna, fall off the steps.
Yeah.
You know, it's all these little things. And to the uninitiated, it's like, oh, did you see Madonna?
No, you know? Did you see that last night on that? Yeah.
I mean, Madonna fairly recently, I mean, talking about 12 months ago, but in more recently than her past, she did this thing. Have you noticed how the female celebrities get in trouble for exposing a breast? The Janet Jackson did it at the Super Bowl thing. You know, her breast came up. Madonna did it about a year ago. I haven't. I could Google it, but I feel rude Googling when I should be talking to you. But hang on.
Well, it makes me wonder what's happening in the real world news when that happens, because that takes all the attention.
Well, here's the thing, right? What people are not getting is, no, this is ancient symbology. You know, it's ancient symbology. And you know, when the Freemasons, they do their ritual, they have to bare their breasts, don't they?
Okay, well, yeah, okay.
It's so what, and here it is, like the sun. Madonna was right to bare her boob at 53, right? This wasn't about Madonna getting her boobs out, right? This was nothing about her showing what a feminist she is, right? She's been told to do that. And yeah, I'm looking at the picture now. I don't know. But anyway.
But it is strange.
There's just a lot more to this life than meets the eye.
Oh, good God, yeah. And look, again, the other point, and I'm going to bring up two more points. So if we want to look at what you're talking about and we want to apply it to, let's say, our world, Chris, and what we've been through, what I would implore, and if you can put this in the, you know, in there, make links to this, if I would implore people to look up two things. One is Project for New America. Okay, so just look up
the Project for the New American Century.
Yeah, for the New American Century, right? So just look that up and then correlate that to two things. Correlate it to the wars that we're fighting at the moment. So young soldiers, of which once were we, are fighting, and look at the names of the people who are involved in that, because they're common popular recent names. I think Gary Schmidt and Donald Kagan were the perpetrators and writers of it, and it's about America dominating the world. But you'll find names like Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, and Bolton, and they're all still in Congress.
Yeah.
And all I'm saying is, don't listen to what I'm saying, because I could be talking complete poppycock. Just Google it, or DuckDuckGo it. Just research it. And the other one, which is really interesting,
I'm just going to stop you there, because for people listening that are thinking, what are these old bastards talking about?
Yeah.
It's the Project for the New American Century was a neo-conservative think tank
Yeah.
that came together in America. I don't know if came together or was put together is the right word, but basically it was made up of, let's just say, ultra rich
neocons,
so hawks, people that are out to get what they can from this planet and rape it dry, right?
Absolutely.
So they formed this team called the Project for the New American Century, and they started to write policy, which was then adopted by Congress or adopted by what we would call Parliament, right?
Forced
and
upon.
one of the things that they said, one of the documents they wrote was a paper called Rebuilding America's Defenses.
Yes.
And in that document, it said America needs to establish further dominance in the world. We're talking in military terms. In order to secure the kind of wealth for the next few generations, right? So what they're saying is they need to increase their military presence around the world in order to keep the money flowing to America, right? And obviously the power that goes with it. But this is unlikely to happen until we get a new Pearl Harbor.
That's the words that are written in it, correct?
Yeah. So for those people that are wondering about Pearl Harbor, was where the Japanese attacked the American fleet in the Pacific, and the Americans used that attack to enter the Second World War. Going back to what we were saying earlier about all war is a lie anyway, the Americans knew the Japanese were, there were people in the American infrastructure, military and otherwise, that knew damn well the Japanese were coming to bomb the fleet. And they just turned a blind eye to I think it was the radio communications, because they could hear the pilots talking, because they wanted America to enter the war. Why? Because war is hugely profitable.
Of course it is.
And life is cheap, right? To them, life is cheap. So
nothing.
So you've got this neoconservative think tank that are that are relying on a new Pearl Harbor to establish American dominance, further American dominance in the world. And then, of course, you had the events in New York.
Of course.
So,
then, of course, that gave them carte blanche to go and create this war on terror, which Bush was the puppet to instigate, and to attack the seven countries, being Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and really their big one that they want is Iran, right? And the funny thing is here is that was predicted by General Wesley, somebody. Not predicted, he blew the whistle on that. And today you can YouTube him saying that. And I'll come back to the Syria thing in a minute.
And am I right in thinking also, if you throw Venezuela and also North Korea into that equation, are they not the countries that refused the global banking system?
Yeah, they don't have the Federal Reserve. They're not under the Federal Reserve. Yeah.
So going back again to our Second World War scenario, you had Hitler there that threw out the bankers out of his country.
Yeah.
Right. In essence, Germany was living in an impoverished state after the First World War. Hitler served in the First World War. He saw the way that the people back home pulled the rug out from under the soldiers so that they couldn't win that war, even if they wanted to. He then harbored that bitterness, as it were, when he saw what was happening to Germany, i.e. it was being carved up by the surrounding nations. Inflation had gone through the roof. People were like, to buy a potato, you had to have a wheelbarrow full of money, that it was worthless, right? on top of that, you had like mothers and their daughters were having to prostitute themselves in all kinds of hideous ways because Germany became the brothel of Europe. And if you were a sicko that had some kind of, sick fetish, like you wanted to sleep with a handicapped child, or
that's where you went on holiday.
You went to Germany to do it, right? Hitler's seeing all this going on, and he's like, he wanted to turn it around. He wanted to take back autonomy for Germany. And one of the first things he did in this rise to power, or when he established power, was he kicked out the Rothschilds, right? The global banking system, the World Bank, because he could see this world banking system keeps all of us in money slavery, this having to pay interest all the time on what essentially is bits of paper printed by greedy little men.
Yeah.
People don't know what the World Bank, the World Bank, not the World, I keep saying the World Bank, but the central, yeah, or in each country, it's called the central bank, right? Bank, yeah. In London, there's a central bank. It doesn't belong to England.
It's private.
Say again?
It's private.
Yeah, privately owned. It's a private company. Yeah. The people that give you your money are private people.
Yeah.
That money isn't backed by gold or anything, so it's not worth anything. So they're giving you a bit of paper to go and buy your house.
Yeah.
And then they're charging you interest on. It's a bit of paper. It's nothing. And you have to pay back 10% on that piece of paper.
And they can print as much as they want.
Yep. And they're allowed to put out, the banks are then allowed to lend more money than is in the actual system.
Yeah.
And so when these rich old banking families decide they want to pull the plug and they want to consolidate all that wealth, what they do is they start putting interest rates up. People start defaulting on the loan.
Yeah.
The small companies start folding because the money isn't in circulation to pay these loans back, because the banks have lent out 10 times more the money than is in the actual system. So this money can't come back in. So the small companies fold, the big companies owned by these big players hoover up all those small companies. So they dominate the industry and they take all that wealth. That is what when you hear about these financial collapses, what is behind them? It's private individuals playing the system, right? Hitler saw this and he said, "You're not doing that in my country, son. Off you fuck," right? So of course, what did they do? They went to England and said, and using all the power of that comes with being the richest people in the world, they then used the corrupt politicians in England to start focusing a war effort on Germany, right? And then of course, when Hitler he invaded, I don't think he invaded Poland. I think he put his troops on the border.
He put them on the border of Poland there and Germany, and he said that if the French had marched in, they would have been annihilated.
Yeah,
and then he caused a false flag, of course.
It's irrelevant what his intentions were. That wasn't important to these bankers.
In the area or whatever it's called.
They just needed an act that could look like aggression, so they could send Britain to war, right? So when you see people at Remembrance going, "Oh, this can never happen again, our brave," it's like, yeah, the soldiers are very brave to go off. I mean, the amount of people that died in the First and Second World War is utterly horrific. These are just children, a lot of them, right?
Of course.
Sent in waves upon waves to attack an enemy that just machine gunned them down, or at least.
And amazing how many millionaires were made during that.
And what people don't know is the Bush family, if you trace it back, they were playing both sides of the war, along with the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, and J.P. Morgan. They were all controlling the banks in the different countries in the same war. So the same banking family is making money off Germany, and it's making money off Britain, and it's making money off France, right?
So it's a bit like Trump having shares in Raytheon. It makes Trident missiles, or is it Trident, or what are the missiles that he used to attack Syria, their airbase, which were pretty impotent missiles. But he makes a fortune every time he launches a missile.
Well, George Bush was in Auschwitz, right, saying, "Oh, this can never happen again," right? He's referring to you know what
surprisingly he found his way there.
Yeah, well, he's referring to the Holocaust, right?
Yeah.
What he's not telling the public is his family had a factory in the town of Auschwitz. You know, it's called Oswiecim in Polish. I've been there. I like to, I like to put my money where my mouth is and go and see these places, so that I then informs my opinion on them. And I got a lot of interesting things I can say about that probably at another time. But they had a steel factory, or there was a steel factory there, and the Bush family worked it to get the slave labor from Auschwitz to work in this factory, of which one of their grandfathers had a controlling share.
So very similar to BASF.
Yeah. And I'm not saying this with any kind of surprise or whatever. No. I'm just saying this is how these guys work. They don't give a fuck about you, and they don't care about me.
No.
Now, here's the thing. I have an issue now with remembrance, because as much as, we're going to remember our fallen comrades, and we're going to honor the fallen, and by God, it was just all horrendous. There's no taking that away. But what I have the problem with is by buying into this, these guys did it to save us. They did it for our friends. It's like, no, they didn't. They died needlessly to make bankers even richer than they already are. Yeah. And by going and wearing your poppy, and this is not about whether you should wear a poppy or not. No, I personally, I do. But it's about saying, while you buy into that narrative, these bastards are just going to do the same thing again, And so rather than,
dreadfully sad,
if you really care about the Second World War, the First World War, and you really don't want young men to go off and lose stop going and voting it for these puppets that don't care about you. They don't work for you. Yeah, they might sort you some tax credits, which gives you the illusion that, oh, look, I've got 20 more pounds a week in my bank. These Labour, Labour, Conservative, they're all the same rich elitists that went to the same public schools that like I say, it's not even they don't care about you, they despise you for being.
What's the saying? It's like voting for which dose of the clap you'd like best.
Yeah.
and also, if voting made a difference, they wouldn't allow us to do it.
It's like being put up against a wall to be shot, but they very kindly let you vote on whether this guy's going to shoot you or that one. Oh, is that not a democracy? Is that not democracy, right? So my point isn't to slander anyone, to diminish anyone's war effort. We're both ex-military. We've both been in the theatre of war. And we don't want other young men to make. We didn't make mistakes. We just didn't know, Graeme, did we?
Just don't know.
I went into Northern Ireland, and again, I'm not commenting on the politics there, but I didn't know anything about them when I was 18 or I was 19.
You get told what you get told in your briefings.
And I was at times there. My behavior towards who I thought was the enemy, when I was dealing with what the BBC will call IRA terrorists, what the Irish will call freedom fighters.
Yeah.
Okay. When I was dealing with these people, because you literally bumped into them on the street, and of course you've got an automatic weapon, you just say, "Stop, sunshine, I want to speak to you," right? I'm 19 years old, for crying out loud. what kind of God-given right did I have to stop this guy? He's 50.
And what life experience did you have to make any conclusions?
He certainly knows more about this situation than me.
Yeah.
So all I would say is I'm saying what I'm saying because I have respect for the troops. It's not the other way around. It's like I respect those young men and women that are going to be put into a theatre of war at some point in the future, and they're going to die.
Yeah.
And I respect them so much that I will say my bit, because I'm not brainwashed. I don't watch mainstream TV. I've long since, I've long since stopped that nonsense, right? I'm a free thinker, and I always have been. And I think part of the reason is when you grow up a bit of an angry young man, it's like you ain't gonna let other people tell you what you're gonna think. At school, I wouldn't let myself be bullied, Graeme. Whereas I was actually probably a prime candidate because I come from quite a disturbed background.
Yeah.
Certainly a lot of upheaval. It's like no one's going to get one over,
Yeah.
It's like no one's going to get one over on me, right? And it's the same in my life now. It's like you put a gun to my head. It's like you're not going to intimidate me. You're just not going to intimidate me. Pull the trigger. See, that's, and it's the same that it's like I won't be bullied by these people. I won't be bullied. I'll say my bit, and it's just a shame that very few. It's used the expression ex-servicemen, but former servicemen, ex-servicemen.
Yeah.
They don't see what you and I see now, right?
Yeah.
They're still on that journey that we were when, like I said, back when I was 19, I thought the world was like this because that's what the media told me. And that's what the boffins in the army, in the Marines told me.
Yeah.
But luckily, through traveling through, 80 different countries and going through addiction and writing books and studying at university and reading and then more reading and then observing the world and talking to people and making just more than my fair share of mistakes, right? I've learned to see the world in a very different light.
Of course. Well, I'll come back. I have a theory on that, which I'll come back to. But you've just addressed quite a lot of subjects, so let me try and just flick some of them off. I implore anybody who's listening to this not to believe us two old farts at all. But I also will give, and if you can link them, things to look up so you can find it out for yourself. So we talked about banking first. Just go on YouTube and look how the Federal Reserve works. That's all you need to do. A 5-minute video on YouTube about how the Federal Reserve works. It will enlighten you to everything that you just said, Chris. Yeah. Then to back that up and find out where the Federal Reserve came from, research Jekyll Island.
Yeah,
and that will explain to you that this nexus of very powerful people got together and formulated in secret this control thing. So what that starts doing, Chris, is instead of just listening to derelict old bad-backed ex-military people who sound grumpy, you can actually find it out for yourself, right? You can go and find it out for yourself. And if you find it out for yourself and you follow your nose and you go down your own rabbit hole, you'll start believing that stuff.
Right. Graeme, I think this is the perfect point in our conversation to, what's that word the Americans use? What's that bloody bicycle? Segue, that's it. This is the perfect point to segue into PTSD. And the reason I say that is part of the reason I try to enlighten people as to what war is really about, not freedom and democracy. That's what George Bush, the Bush family want you to believe so they can get even richer, right? Is when you go into a war zone, you have to kill people.
Yeah.
And it's not nice and it's not pleasant.
Yeah.
I've read many books on the Falklands now, and it's just so visceral and unreal what they had to do down there.
Yeah.
You know, the Marines and the paras had to crawl up to trenches that had 16-year-old conscripts in. So basically, again, I use the term children because I was a child until I was about 47.
Yeah.
Right. You know, I was vulnerable. I just didn't know stuff. Right.
Yeah.
But these almost literally these are teenagers at most. Right. And the Marines and the paras had to crawl up to that trench, pull the pin on a grenade and chuck it in. Right. Some of them, one of the Marines, his famous catchphrase was "Morning," like that. You know, he'd wake them up so he could see their faces before he threw the grenade in, right? And here's the thing. Whichever way you look at that, that's an atrocity. It's an atrocious scenario, right? If you perpetrate that, you then have to live with it, right? I'm not trying to put a guilt thing or trigger people.
No, it's just anything.
I'm just saying what needs to be said so people can consider this before they get sent to one of these sham wars and they start leveling villages with £100,000 rockets, you know, multi-million-pound rocket systems that fire £100,000 rockets or £30,000 mortars or whatever, or laser-guided missiles. Yeah. All that money, all the public's taxpayer money is paid for that. That all goes to these private corporations, right, that don't care about you, and they certainly don't care about me. And you need to be aware of this, because if you do go and hurt someone, you then have to come out the other side and deal with it, right? Now, forgiveness is everything, and there are ways to move forward from what we did when we were young, right? And I've done despicable things in the past, and I yeah, and that's where they are now. I've left them in the past because we can only be productive and create a good society when we know how to, right? We can't go blaming ourselves for stuff that we didn't know, right? But when it comes to the PTSD, it must be very hard for somebody who's gone and hurt somebody in you know, destroyed a family in a theatre of war, who then comes through the awakening that you and I have and goes, do you know what? That war was a crock of shit. Yeah. And then they've got to deal with that mindset.
It's what I call the Vietnam principle, where you know, like the My Lai massacre and the helicopter pilot that stopped his own troops from killing Viet Cong, raping them. So
it weren't even Viet Cong; they were the innocent villagers, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And the Yanks were just stoned, going mad, and just got absolutely postal and started killing them and raping them. And the helicopter, I forget his name. I apologise, because he's one of my absolute heroes. He landed Huey in between them and told his gunners to train the guns on his own troops. And of course, he, you know, that caused a lot of trouble. But he's my, you know, my absolute idol. What a freaking hero. But what you're talking about in PTSD is what I call or label the Vietnam complex. So you've been brainwashed, you've fought a good fight, you've killed terrorists, you come home and you find out it's all a freaking lie, and you wake up to that, and that's as you said that earlier, that some of these ex-military never wake up to that, and maybe that's because it's going to be too painful to wake up to that, and the ones that do have got to try and somehow consolidate with that and come to terms with that. And that's a very, very, very hard thing to do, and that's one of the most complex parts of my counsel. I'm a trained crisis counsellor, and I worked here for Lifeline, and I try to counsel off my own Facebook page, frontline staff, emergency staff, and vets, and it's the most complex one is people who they have woken up, become enlightened to the fact that they've just done 3 tours in an illegal war or a dirty war or whatever you want to call it, and they possibly killed people that were innocent and they weren't insurgents or they were actually defending their own country. Perhaps they were the honourable ones. In this fight, this war against freedom, war against terrorism, or whatever it is, and the best people who hit the nail ahead are comedians. Really, as an Australian comedian, I'll try and remember his name, and Bill Hicks, and what happens when you catch the terror? How do you have a war on terror? It's an oxymoron, but that's a complex issue with PTSD.
I like Doug Stanhope.
Oh, he's brilliant, isn't he?
He's got this. I can't remember what his gag is, but it's something like he occasionally will get heckled by a US Marine or something for the audience. It's very.
Talks about nationalism. Yeah.
Well, they generally don't tend to be Marines in his audience because they don't get his sense of humor.
No.
But his thing is like, yeah, war. I love it. I love the armed forces. I think all the fucking assholes should go and join it and go off to war and get killed, right? It's a kind of it's a bit near the knuckle, but what he's trying to say is
he's very clever.
Like, he's trying to say that there's a lot of kind of almost like sociopathic young men and women join the forces to go off and kill, and that mindset is quite disturbing.
Well, there's somebody who said something the other day that rang true to me, and that is that as a nation,
can I just say, Graeme, so people don't misunderstand me? I'm talking about these gung-ho, trigger-happy, I'm going to say Americans, although I'm sure there's people in our ranks too, that they don't care like whether that guy's really an enemy or not. They just want to kill someone.
Yeah, there is. Yeah,
and they've got rock music playing to hype them up while they do it.
Plus, they're fueled with righteousness. They've been indoctrinated with righteousness.
One of the things Ben Griffin says is when he was in SAS in the Middle East, they'd go out and do house searches in the night. He said very rarely they could find anyone on the terrorist wanting list. He said most of the time it's just happy terrified families. They'd go back to their operating base every morning and go, no, nothing happened last night. Yeah. The Yanks would come in, yay! We got 5 kills. And the Brits and Ben Griffin's thing is, look, who the fuck were you killing? Because we couldn't find anybody. No. The suggestion is they were killing anybody, right?
Well, they were probably recruited in the Walmart car park.
Well, there you go. Yeah. Yeah.
And unfortunately, if you fight lots of wars, you need a lot of soldiers. And so the standards drop.
Yeah. Graeme, could you, for the benefit of people listening, just give a kind of short synopsis on what PTSD is? I know that we're coming to realize now it's not one single thing like we used to maybe think it was. It's very, very complex.
So I'll give my definition for sure. which the first thing I'll say is I call it post-traumatic stress. So I don't call it a disorder because I don't believe it's a disorder. I believe it's a reaction. Yeah. And I believe it's a reaction from your nervous system. And the other thing I'll say is I'll never say that I suffered with PTSD. I'll say that I experienced PTSD because the wording of I suffered means that it's then a disorder or it's a problem. But really, to me it's a reaction. And I'll try and qualify what I'm saying. I don't believe it's a psychological condition. I believe it's a physiological condition. So I explain it like this in my videos. I've made some videos to try and explain it, and where I've drawn upon my belief system is from Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, a leading authority on PTSD, and Professor Gordon Turnbull in the UK, who treated Terry Waite and John McCarthy back when that happened.
And just for the sake of people listening, they were taken hostage in the Middle East. They spent many years basically chained to a radiator. Yeah. And when they came back, they were helped by this gentleman to rehabilitate themselves into normal life.
And he's obviously a psychiatrist or psychologist. He's also ex-RAF, and he was mountain rescue. So he's had a bit of life experience as well. And he's considered a global authority on PTSD or PTS.
Can you get life experience in the RAF?
I'm not really sure. I suppose if you go mountain rescue, you might get a little bit.
I didn't know. I didn't think you guys left the camp.
Not often. Why would you? Why would you? And luckily enough,
I'm just playing the
enough, when I joined the regiment, it was before the 5 miles of death, so I obviously survived, which is pretty good. I was very lucky there to miss that. So post-traumatic stress. I experienced it for many years, and then I learned how to deal with it. I then counseled many people, and I worked out through critical thinking some similarities. Now, the first thing is, if you catch the flu, which I'm trying not to catch at the moment, if you go to the doctor and the doctor will say, what symptoms do you have? And you say, sore throat, aching muscles, headache, sneezing, coughing. You'll have a selection of those, and he'll say, well, there's a flu going around. Here's your drugs. This is how we treat the flu. In my experience, what he doesn't say, what the doctor doesn't say is, how did you contract the flu? It doesn't say, did you kiss someone? Did someone sneeze on you? Did you shake hands? Have you been on an aeroplane with air conditioning? He just knows it's the bloody flu, and he gives you the treatment for it. So it's a physiological illness. Now, with post-traumatic stress, excuse me, from all my years of experience in counselling people with post-traumatic stress, it manifests in pretty much the same way. It doesn't matter whether you spent 5 years in war, 6 months in war, 3 tours of war, dropped grenades on people, saw people get killed, killed people, were raped as a child, bullied as a child, in a bad car accident, fell out of a tree, were held hostage. However you contract PTS, it manifests in pretty much the same way. Now, that alone tells me that it's a physiological condition. And therefore, we must treat the physiological condition, which means we can remove the stigma from it.
Yeah.
Right? Instantly remove the stigma. That's easy for us to remove the stigma. Obviously, if you're a frontline policeman, or if you're still an active soldier, people still have a view of the stigma about it and think that it's a psychological condition and you're weak, so they won't come forward for help. And that's the awful sad thing about it, because it's, in my view, it's quite easily treated, and it's a very temporary condition. And again,
can I just say, and I won't keep interrupting, but it's that same bigoted view in the forces that prevent people seeking help for addiction.
Yes.
You know, we drink beer, it's fine. You know, we don't do that drug shit.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's like, they're all drugs, guys. Get over it. Beer is like the worst. Alcohol is, as a substance misuse specialist, awful. It's the worst drug. The worst. It destroys people, right?
Destroys families.
So having this attitude that, you know, if you have any kind of mental disorder, makes you weak, is that kind of same thing. It's these few bigoted people that prevent the majority from seeking help.
Yeah, and the military is a very ego-driven environment. So let's bring this back a little bit to the military, because that's what we're talking about and that's where we're from. So I tried to trace things back as to why the military people experience post-traumatic stress so much. Because the percentage of military people getting it was surprisingly more than say my ambulance buddies or police. And I've managed to trace some part of it back and map some of it. And this isn't all of it. There's tentacles. But one of the reasons is, Chris, and you know, talking to you, I've already worked out that, you know, why you joined the military as well. Two reasons we joined the military. One is, well, sorry, there's more than two, but two that pertain to post-traumatic stress is, one, we come from broken families, or we come from traumatic pasts, and we don't have a family, so we go and join the military because the first human need is family or tribe. So Maslow's triangle and other platforms, frameworks, our first human need is to belong to a family. So we go and find a family, and that's the military. And then we give our allegiance to that family.
So Maslow, for people who are unfamiliar, Maslow was a sociologist. He came up with this theory that there's a triangle, and that for human, and if you think of the top of the triangle as actualization, which is what I've been saying, calling enlightenment, right?
Yeah.
So pure happiness. He's like saying there's a base of this triangle, or think of it as a pyramid. You need to build your base. So that's your basic needs, like food, fire, and water. Then you've got shelter. Then you've got human relationships. Then on top of that, you've got fulfillment. So and what he's saying, Maslow was saying, is you've got to fulfill those basic needs in order to work to a point in your life where you can ultimately become sort of happy. So a guy that hasn't got any food in his stomach or anywhere to sleep one night isn't particularly going to be worrying about reading about Karl Marx or self-help book or this kind of thing. But the guy that's got all that stuff in place is in a position to kind of, you know, cherry pick his life a bit. And what you're saying, Graeme, is that for young people, we haven't even got that stable bottom part of the, you know, I mean, I'm a great example of that, because I was living in my car when I joined the Marines, you know, or certainly when I went down the recruiting office. I was homeless for the second time in my life. So I didn't even have a roof over my head. Well, unless you call a Renault 12 estate car a roof. So yes, so this is an indicator of, or a driver behind a lot of people joining up in the first place.
It is. So trauma drives people to join a family. Now, it's not just the military. Biker gangs are very, very similar, because they're the same type of family. You get your colours, your totem, your badge, your honours, your ranks. It's a very similar thing, and you'll find that it's full of the very similar people. And if you could harness bikers and put them in the military, you'll find they're very good soldiers. The second thing that I found, and this was through speaking to an ex-military psych here when I came to Australia first to sort myself out, was and is that a lot of the military are actually have an ADHD type brain makeup. And you certainly have, and I'll say that absolutely without fear of saying that, whether you know it or not. I guarantee you have, just from talking to you for half an hour. And therefore,
could you just sum up what ADHD is then, for people that might not be?
I'll do it in a nicer way, because ADHD is just, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is what it says in the DSM. Okay?
Sorry, what were you saying?
Exactly. Squirrels. And people with that makeup, they're thrill seekers, and they have to have something to do, and they love to be told what to do. So the military is full of these people. Now, I don't call it ADHD, I call it Da Vinci type makeup, and it's a genetic polymorphism of the gene DRD4, and 10% of society have this polymorphism, which is the thrill-seeking gene. And most of those people are incredibly successful people. Michael Jordan, Bill Gates, lots of these people, but also a lot of them who haven't recognized their brilliance, become big failures as well. So this was written about by a psychologist called Otto Ranks, who was a protege of Sigmund Freud. But his books never got noticed or recognized because they only applied to 10% of society. So he never really, although he's absolutely right. And what he called was, he labeled it the neurotic Da Vinci or the artistic Da Vinci, after Leonardo da Vinci, who was obviously ADHD. Right? He had so many projects on the go and was a genius and didn't finish most of them. So we joined the military, and it sort of goes to what you were saying earlier about people just wanting the action, and it's so glamorous for thrill seekers. Where else do you get that? There are other jobs, but the military is one of those main ones. So with childhood trauma, or if you like, complex post-traumatic stress, you then go into a war zone, or your ADHD, you then go into a war zone. We've already got a predisposition for post-traumatic stress. When we leave the military, we're leaving that family that we had. And you referred earlier to some ex-military people who don't get it. But you, Chris, you since you've left, you've done some other stuff, right? You've done some amazing things, and the military or the Marines doesn't define you. You define you. And I've done some amazing things, and this is where my argument about civilian bashing comes into it, because I've worked with better civilians than I have with some of my ex-military people. I've seen some rubbish ex-military people and some amazingly brave civilians who I've worked with, whether that's in aid work or whether that's in paramedics or even in Africa as a guide. So you can't just put this stupid military people are the best and civilians are idiots. And what that happens is that people, because the military is the best and only thing they've done, and then they get out and they go through something that I've labeled adjustment disorder, where they can't, and also civilian life is a lot harder than military life. In the military life, everything's done for you, right? Civilian life, you've got to have your own bank account, your own car, your own insurance. You've got to, no one else is going to look after you out there. You haven't got any mates around you. It's just not happening. You've got to do it. And so if they get out and they were a corporal or a sergeant, and then they had all the respect, and they had this forced lauding or respect in the military because you have to respect rank, and then they get out and become a carpenter, a truck driver, a whatever, they no longer do they have that respect, and that's a very hard thing to adjust to. And again, something quite interesting, I think quite a lot of times people, ex-military who have left, become depressed. It's just depression, clinical depression.
Yeah, can I just chip in here and say that the issues that these ex-military guys, so they come from this very cosseted career where everything's done for you, right? We both know that.
Yeah.
You've also had this thing like when you're in military, you're up there, whether it's because you got green berry or you a cherry berry, or you're up there. You've been led to believe that civilians are shit, because that makes it easier to go and kill other people if you think you're superior, right? But you come out of the military and then things don't go well for you, so you're not this big fish in a little pond anymore.
Yeah,
you're a little fish in a very big pond.
Very big pond.
You've been taught that your best coping mechanism is alcohol.
Yeah.
All right. Things aren't straightforward in Civvy Street. Relationships are more complicated. When you have a disagreement at work, for example, you can't just tell the person, I'll see you outside, and have a punch up and then shake hands and it's done with. It's got to be done through these channels, all of which just seem so pathetically job's worth to you and tedious.
Yeah.
You have to work with people that don't have your value system.
Yeah.
Okay, they may have better values in different ways, but you know, in the military, you have a problem with someone, you go to their face and you tell them.
Yeah.
In civilian street, in your office, if someone's got a problem with you, what do? They go behind your back and they go and see your manager.
Yeah.
And then they come back and sit in the chair opposite you and start telling you about their packed lunch and what they watched on telly, as if they haven't just gone and grashed you up to the senior manager. Right. Yeah, and then you go and get, you know, maybe a disciplinary action against you, and that is normal to them, right?
Yeah.
These are things that are hard for service people to accept, and as such, the alcohol becomes more the lack of self, the loss of anger, the loss of identity.
Yeah.
Family relationships start to suffer because you're taking it out on the person who loves you the most, your partner and your children.
Yeah.
You're then it becomes a situation of, well, listen, honey, you're becoming too much for us. You need to go away and sort your stuff out because it's not fair on me and the children. So then you lose your family, right? I'm just giving different examples here. And this is where you'll go to your GP and say, you know, things aren't really going well. And for good, for bad, and for whatever, he might go, PTSD, right?
Yeah. Ex-military PTSD.
You know, now, he might be suggesting that what you saw in Iraq or Afghanistan or Northern Ireland is the cause of all this. Whereas what we've just explained, Graeme, is no, there's a load of factors, you know. There's our damaged childhoods, which meant we weren't very well cookies in the first place. We didn't really have our house in order. We went to this massive indoctrination called the military before we even knew who we were, right?
Yeah.
We were then cosseted and looked after and told that we were the, you know, the big cheese, the elephant's bollocks, so to speak.
They removed your flight and freeze response in training.
And then we come out the other end of that brainwashing machine and that big up machine and realize, no, we're actually
no deprogramming whatsoever.
Yeah. We're like a rock star coming off stage. He's on stage, his head is this big.
Yeah.
The second he steps through that exit door, he goes, his head goes, he realizes I'm actually just Joe Bloggs, I'm just completely normal.
Yeah.
So what does he do? Hits the drugs, isn't it? To get that feeling back again. And this is what we're seeing with where you get this PTSD label. Is it's a whole raft of complex ingredients. And the problem with throwing this blanket term is then when you do get people suffering the stress of war, for example, Jason Fox from the TV program SAS Who Dares Wins, fellow Royal Marine of mine. I met Jason, actually, a very, very nice man. The book he's written is just an exceptional, brave expose of what he went to when the stress of war, and he will openly say it wasn't to do with my childhood. I had a great childhood, right? He said it was just the stress of war and feeling you're invincible, and then getting to the fulcrum point where it starts to tip and realizing, actually, a lot of my mates are dead. I'm not invincible, and I'm actually a bit scared of this now, and I want to go home and be with my family. And he says at that moment he realized something wasn't right, and his career was never going to be the same again, right? So that, for me, really is PTSD for, you know. And you hear a lot of people go, oh, they used to call it shell shock. Well, it's like, what Jason is describing is more what I would call shell shock. You know, this like real, your nerves have been frayed for so long. You've been on edge.
You've had too much cortisone and too much adrenaline pumping through your body for too long, and that's not a good. Adrenaline, cortisone is good if a tiger walks around the corner and you need to run away, but to have it for 6 months and then come home for 2 months, and then go for another 6 months, and another, and another, and another. Eventually, your nervous system is going to start defaulting, because we're only human. We're only a body and a system and a lump of plastic, and it can only take so much of those hormones, of those stress hormones, and then you're going to start getting ill.
This comes back about to what I'm saying about fitting in with the universal plan. Is war is extreme. You're out there in your box of your own. You're not a part of this beautiful thing called the universe, right? You're operating and putting your body at odds with your environment, and you can only do that like for so long.
There's a very strange irony, Chris, as well, where people become addicted to it. I think the Hurt Locker, the film The Hurt Locker, alludes to this. And I saw it when I was an aid worker in Bosnia, with not just aid workers who would go from one war zone to another, but the photographers and the reporters. They become addicted to this crazy life and war zones, and they follow them from one place to another, because when they go back, they just cannot fit in to normal people's problems,
and they don't get the buzz, you know.
No.
So
and it's just mundane and first world problems.
I'm conscious here that for anyone listening that think they might be experiencing any of the things we've talked about, what can people, the first thing I'd like to say is, whatever, I mean, I've been through lots of trauma in my life. I went through trauma as a child, as a very, very young, well, probably as a baby as well, if I was honest. I also went through the trauma of working for the Hong Kong Triads and suffering crystal meth psychosis. So I was mentally ill whilst working for the Hong Kong Triads. I was only a doorman. I mean, I was a doorman for them, if anyone's wondering what I did.
Alive.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. When I came back to the UK, I didn't know what was happening to me because nobody could explain it, Graeme. The medical profession were very kind of limited in their knowledge. My biggest thing was actually depression. Having lived such an exciting time in Hong Kong, I had to come back to England, and there was nothing here. I hated it. I absolutely didn't want to be in England. I hated everything about it, the boringness of it, right? Yeah. Anyway, to say to people listening, if you are struggling like I did, do not give up hope. There is definitely light at the end of the tunnel. You just haven't found it yet.
The reason I'm writing my book, Chris, and I apologize to everybody. I apologize to myself for not getting it written quick enough. Life and work gets in the way. Is that I am writing my book. It's a very simple, and it's called the PTSD Survival Guide. It's a very simple guide to get yourself out that shit. And it is, and I believe it is quite easy and quite quick to do. Dion Jensen, a good friend of mine, ex-New Zealand military, ex-New Zealand police, and did a lot of time on the circuit. He wrote the first good news book about PTSD. Now that's free to download on Success for Soldiers, which he runs. So
I'll put that link in the comments.
So the first thing for anyone who's, because this is the crux of it, Chris, right? Hopefully there's people out there who are listening. They're hitting the bottle. They're self-medicating. They're arguing. They may have split up. They're depressed. They have suicidal ideation. They don't want to talk. They don't know what's going on. They're having dreams, nightmares, night paralysis, night terrors. They don't know what's going on. Where do they go? Well, they come to the likes of us. They can go to Dion's website, Success for Soldiers, and download his book. And it speaks in military terminology. It's very simple. Okay.
So people listening, right, if you don't help yourselves, no one else is going to. Forget all this Facebook shit about, call a mate if he's struck. Like, people don't do that. People are generally pretty shit, right? This is my experience.
Yeah.
Right. So please listen to what Graeme's saying. I'll put a link for that book down below. if you don't read it, then it's your fucking problem, isn't it? You know?
Then you're going to stay where you are. If you don't read that book,
you know,
do what he says.
I'll put a link for my book, and in case you're wondering, authors these days, we don't make money off our books.
Don't make any money.
If you think this is a plug,
actually pay to get them.
Yeah, I've paid to write my 4 books now has probably cost me about coming up for £200,000.
Yeah,
because that's what I would have. It's taken 10 years. Yeah, right. And I have
$10,000 to publish my book.
So this is not a book. This is not a book plug. You need to get over that.
Yeah,
I'll put a link for my book 40 Nights in the comments. You can read Eat Smoke first, but 40 Nights is how I got myself out of the shit, how I changed my thinking after my moment of epiphany, and how I then went on and achieved every single goal, and ultimately happiness, which is, you know, that's my crowning glory, is I came from the worst to being I'm the happiest person I know. I don't meet people that just love life all the time, even when I'm unhappy, you know, even when I'm like, sometimes you wake up depressed because I've been doing one of my extreme endurance events and it takes a lot out of you, right? Even when I'm depressed, I still know I'm like the happiest person in the world, which sounds an irony, but
okay. So it's an interesting story, and I might even give you an invite to write in my book. And my book is in 3 parts. It's based upon, you're an old fart like me. It's based upon our old Adhd memoir field guide. Do you remember it? Right? Yeah. And you could just turn to any section. So my book is written in 3 sections. You can read it back to front, inside out, whichever way you can turn to the section that's affecting you. The first part is my story and how I experienced PTSD and got through it. The second part is my tools of each section: sleep, diet, the brain, depression, anxiety, etc., etc. And the third part is individual people's stories. So I may come to you and ask for 3 pages of A4 about how you contracted PTSD, what it looked like for you, when you noticed you had it, and what did you do to get out of it. But the people who've written in that book, I've got people who experienced, who did the march from Srebrenica and came to Australia and got raped. I've got paramedics who have done horrendous jobs, and that was the genesis of my book from my buddy in the UK, who forced me to do the press up challenge. And then his story resonated. And one of the things that I started to say was, if you have post-traumatic stress, don't be ashamed of it, wear it like a badge of honor. And that's the very, very first step, because you've earned it. You deserve it. So don't be ashamed of it. Relish in it. Don't take that too far. Okay. So the stories, I'll have about 10 of the stories that are from people who have been through, and Dion will be one of these, the people who have been there, idolized suicide, come through post-traumatic stress, come out the other side, and now happy people who no longer are affected by post-traumatic stress. Because I'm sick of people saying you can't get over it.
Yeah. Couple of things, 2 things I say. One is, I never went to see it. I couldn't go and see doctors because they kept telling me I was ill, and I'm like, no, I'm just experiencing life. You know, I really reacted badly against being told. I mean,
you have an illness or disorder. Yeah.
Well, it was the whole thing about I take drugs. Fucking get over it. That's how I want to live my life.
Yeah. At this stage.
And so off the back of that is I was never diagnosed with anything. I definitely had, was suffering the effects of some sort of trauma, because the depression
your quintessential complex post-traumatic stress and CPSD is a lot more difficult to deal with or treat. And I would, I find it very hard to treat people or talk to people with PTSD. It needs a lot of expert feelings.
Everything I've experienced is all as well a manifestation of that complex childhood trauma that we talked about as well.
Because you have to get to that. You have to find that anger, and you have to dispel it or learn to live with it or deal with it. And one of the complex issues there is at whatever age you were traumatized, you will have an emotional reaction of that age about many things. And that's a very difficult thing to live with. It's a very difficult thing to treat. And it's a very difficult thing for other people to live with, because there's a difference in emotional regulation.
I'm conscious of the time here, Graeme, because I don't want, not everyone's got 3 hours to listen to a podcast. So
absolutely,
what I do want to wrap up now, and then I can't wait to speak to you again, because I'd like to talk about the parachute course, because that was bloody one of the best things I've ever done.
Yeah,
I'd like to talk about your time in Sarajevo. Yeah, and maybe I can talk about my time working in Mozambique, because I think there's a few parallels there. Yeah. Let's wrap up this segment with, you know, if you're a person, maybe you belong to one of these organizations, these voluntary organizations that cropped up that want to support struggling servicemen, how, you know, what is your approach to somebody? So I'm a volunteer, right? Yeah. I care about veterans. You're struggling, Graeme, right? Yeah. Off the bat, I can say, first, you're not trying to change people, right? Yeah. Because change comes from them. Yeah. Second, you're not dictating to them what they can and cannot do. No. Right? You tell me not to do drugs or not to drink alcohol. That's never going to happen until I make that decision.
You have to be realistic.
All that happens is you just go on the list of being another fucking pain in my ass that I wish would just leave me alone. Yeah. Right. And I know people wouldn't want to be that pain in the ass. Right. So there's that. You're not judging the person, you're judging the condition. You know, if the house is a mess, it's not because they're lazy, it's because they're not well. Yeah. If you see them going to the pub again, that's not because, you know, not because they've just ignored all your advice. It's because they're unwell, right? Yeah. So I would say unconditional love.
You have to be non-judgmental. Yeah,
non-judgmental. I'm always here for you. I'm not going to be happy, Graeme, when I see you, you know, sticking that needle in your arm, but I'm not judging you for doing it. So I'm here. I just want to see the day when you're back to your good old self again. That's the best thing I think someone ever said to me. They say, Chris, like, I don't know what to say because I don't understand any of this. No. But like I don't, you know, I just want to see you stop doing that. And I'm here, like, come and live in my house, eat my food. He even gave me his clothes, this guy, right? I'm not suggesting everyone does this, but this was his approach. He never told me ever what I shouldn't do until the right time came, and he gave me a little nudge and went, why don't you go down to the job centre today, Crit? And I was like, yeah, why don't I? You know, why don't I? All right, yeah. And do you know what? That one guy, I've got him to thank for changing my life, you know, and me, of course, but him because he didn't judge me. So what could you add to that, Graeme? Or have I sort of pretty much summed it up?
You'll hear a very similar story in one of my videos that a paramedic friend of mine's son put together as his art video course, which is called Battle Scars by Sam Colledge. I say the same thing about a friend who was non-judgmental. He stuck with me like a rock. He was always there. He offered me work. He was funny. He just would sit and have a beer with me. Just treat people normally. All right? Treat them normally and give them a break. Don't try and force them. Sit next to them. You don't have to question them. You don't have to talk to them. You don't have to preach to them. You don't tell them they've got something wrong with them. Listen if they need to be listened to, listen to them. And in Dion's book, he calls it, he calls that person a battle buddy. So one thing I recommend is if you're going through, first of all, obviously you've got to open up to yourself. You've got to open up to someone else. Find that person. Could be a family member, a friend. could be a doctor, could be a professional, but have a back buddy, someone who you can be honest to, and they can be honest back to you, and they can check in with you from time to time, because you will go through the shitstorm, as Dion calls it. And when you're in the shitstorm, you need a way to get out of it. The other things that you were talking about earlier, you know, injecting drugs, drink, they're symptoms. So let's find out what we can replace those with, and let's address the cause of those symptoms, which is the trauma from childhood, the complex PTSD, or that thing that you're angry with, and let's work out how to sit with that and befriend that, and not make it your enemy anymore, so that you don't have to escape reality.
Yeah.
And be open and honest and not ashamed, and realize that this is a physiological condition. So if you had the flu or kidney stones, you'd go to the doctors. Okay, I don't always advocate medication, but if that's one route, it could be a catalyst. It could be a way to assist. I don't know, but own it, accept it, and don't be ashamed of it. In fact, wear it like a badge of honor, as I say, and then remove the stigma, because it's a physiological reaction. Now, if you're a soldier and you have exactly the same symptoms as somebody who was abused as a child, what's that telling us? That we're all human, and it affects the brain, which is a physiological organ in our body, and it affects it the same way. If it affects it the same way, we can treat it the same way. And my book, and you can read Dion's way, and he's created a thing called the PTSD Solutions Community. So if you don't like me, you don't like my words, you can go and find somebody else. And there's a website, and there's lots of people who've lived experience, and we've all beaten it. So my approach is a holistic approach where we go for sleep, diet, exercise, meditation, holistic approaches. I can also replace supplements in the diet that are going to which we're going to mimic the effects of alcohol, so that we can start weaning off alcohol. I never ever advocate abstinence, because it's pointless. We've got to be realistic. If people smoke marijuana or dope or whatever you want to call it, don't have the hydroponically stuff that's got bloody steroids or whatever they put in it these days. Have natural stuff that's grown and actually has a balance of psychotic and CBD in it, antipsychotic and psychotic, because you can't just tell people to stop doing something. So it's a very simple holistic approach. It's not going to happen overnight like a magic bullet or a pill. It's a holistic approach, but you have to follow it. Once you start following these things and small steps forward, there is a methodology you can follow. I followed it. It took me a long time, but I got there eventually. And I can let people know how to do that a lot quicker. Lot. Yeah.
Graeme, I'm going to stop you there, because I do like you, and I really do like what you're saying, and I can't wait to speak again. I'm just conscious of the time now. So can you if you just stay on the line, I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay, mate.
As we said, friends, the links are going to be below. If there's anything we said, if you got a comment, something you want us to cover in our next talk, when I hope we're going to talk about some fun things as well, like throwing ourselves out of aeroplanes, which is just mental. Everybody should do that at least once in their life. Have to. I'm going to shush there. So Graeme, thank you ever so much for joining us. As I said, stay on the line, and look forward to speaking to you again.
Will do, Chris. Thanks for your time, buddy.
You're very welcome.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Friend, thank you for watching my video. I'm the only person I know that has ticked every item off my bucket list, and I did so coming back from chronic addiction with no help from anybody. Now I want to pass those skills on to you, but I can't help you unless you help me and hit the subscribe button. So please do so, and let's go and smash this world together.